Now, about 40% of Americans will be diagnosed with a type of cancer at some point in their lives. It's an alarming statistic, made even more so by the fact that cancer research itself is under threat in the United States, with the Trump administration continuing to slash millions of dollars in vital funding and leaving countless families scrambling for options. Staff writer for the New York Times Magazine, Jonathan Mahler, is investigating just what kind of impact these cuts are already having across the country. He joins Hari Srinivasan to discuss his findings.
Christian, thanks. Jonathan Mahler, thanks so much for joining us. You wrote a piece in the New York Times Magazine recently, and it's titled, "Trump is Shutting Down the War on Cancer." And you take so many different approaches in this piece. Let's, I guess, start with first. What do you mean by this? Give me the scale of the war on cancer and what he's shutting down.
Yeah. So, I mean, the war on cancer is something that we started, launched in this country, back in 1971. President Nixon actually signed the legislation, the National Cancer Act. And really what it was a commitment to make a sustained, large investment in treating cancer and improving our treatment of cancer. And over the decades, that investment has grown steadily. And now we've reached a moment where we're poised for even greater breakthroughs at the very moment that the Trump administration has decided that we're spending way too much money trying to cure cancer. And the war on cancer, it's happening both in terms of the cancellation of individual grants, so individual projects that were dedicated to discovering kind of new treatments, or adapting new treatments. It's happening in terms of freezes in funding to research universities that depend on NIH money to keep their labs running, are suddenly finding that money frozen, not appearing. And then it's happening on a kind of a even larger scale. And this is something that's still a little bit to be determined. But the president's proposed budget for next year, which is still before Congress, is calling for a 38% cut to our cancer research budget, which is $3 billion. I mean, this is a lot of money. In addition to that, the administration is trying to lower the reimbursement rate that research universities get for their overhead expenses. So, universities that are conducting this research, they have scientists who are doing the work, but they also have to keep the labs running. They have to, employ people to administer the grants. They have to pay for the electricity, et cetera. They're able to expense some of those costs, and the administration wants to dramatically lower the reimbursement rate for universities. So it's really a kind of a 360-degree attack on this funding system.
Give me an idea, or give our audience some perspective here, and set the level. Okay, this has been happening for decades. How successful has that war been? I mean, we're spending billions and billions of dollars every year. I get that. But is there a way that you can measure what a dollar gets us?
Yeah. So, I mean, my favorite statistic is, which was published recently in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, is that about every $300 that the government spends on cancer research extends someone's life by 1 year. So, that feels like a pretty modest investment to me, as as someone who lost his mom to cancer. Seems to me, pretty worth it. To say nothing of the fact that there are enormous economic benefits to this investment too. I mean, the biotechnology industry, the pharmaceutical industry, all of these and all the investors in these companies have all made an enormous amount of money off of the research that began on this basic biological level funded by our government.
And so when somebody gets a cancer today versus perhaps our parents' generation, what is the likely outcome? Are we more likely to survive it? Are there fewer cancers that are kind of untreatable?
our ability to treat cancer has been, dramatically transformed, particularly since the 1990s. So really, if you think about how this whole war on cancer has unfolded, the first, 20 plus years were really a period where scientists were mostly grappling with how much more complicated this disease was than they had realized. It's not a single disease. It's hundreds of thousands of diseases, and each one behaves differently on every organ and in everyone's body. And really, beginning in the late 90s, what had been basically the only options historically had been surgery, really. And then, chemotherapy came along and radiation as well. But these were, both radiation and chemotherapy are enormously toxic, and not always effective. But what the really the biggest innovation and the innovation that scientists are still really building on is what's known as immunotherapy. And immunotherapy is essentially the use of one's immune system to the stimulation of an immune system to detect the mutant cancer cells and fight the cells itself. So your immune system does the work that otherwise these toxic chemotherapy chemicals would be doing, which people tolerate much better. So their quality of life during treatment is much better, and it's also much more effective. So this is a new, immunotherapy is relatively new. We're talking about, 15 years or so. And there's still a lot of cancers where they're just beginning to understand how to use immunotherapy.
To illustrate what's happening kind of in the research ecosystem, you help kind of personalize it by looking at Rachel Sirianni, a professor at the University of Massachusetts. Her research focuses on an aggressive form of pediatric cancer known as medulloblastoma. Tell us her story and how it's indicative of what's happening to other researchers, people who are facing grants.
She's working on basically a new way to deliver drugs into the interior of the brain to attack this very aggressive form of pediatric brain cancer, which kills hundreds of kids every year, medulloblastoma. And so she's been working kind of steadily on this for 10 years now, and she had 3 NIH grants to do this work, was making great progress. Her grants were, just because they only last for 5 years or so, were coming up in 2025 and 2026. So coming into this new year and the new presidential administration, she was aware that she needed new grants to keep her research going. She runs a lab with 7 researchers and technicians, and it's expensive and time-consuming work running all these studies. So she had submitted 2 grant applications to keep her work going to the NIH, and days after the inauguration, she was informed that the meetings where her grants were going to be considered had been canceled. And so months now went by. She had to start laying people off in her lab. She had to cancel one of her most promising studies. And then she was informed that in June that neither project was going to be funded. So now she's faced with this decision of, well, what am I going to do? This is this important work that I'm devoted to, that I've been doing for years now, and I'm making great progress. And she's come to this decision now that she, for the moment at least, she can't really focus on this work any longer, because pediatric brain cancer work is very expensive. It's expensive because it requires a very specific kind of lab mouse. So now she's decided she's going to have to just pivot away from it and start working in some other fields, which is obviously, tragic. I mean, this was a woman who was making great strides in helping children with brain cancer survive. And I mean, it's hard to imagine, something more worthy for our government to be investing in. And yet, here she is having to move to other fields.
So, we're in a period now where you said that in the mid-70s, America's 5-year cancer survival rate sat at 49%. Today, it's 68%. That's startling, considering how relatively new immunotherapy is, and perhaps some of the work that's happening with mRNA research that could impact cancer. Is this a productive time for cancer research?
Many people whom I spoke with said that this is one of the most productive moments, if not the most productive moment in the history of cancer research, because we have all of that accumulated knowledge. We have all of this new technology. We have artificial intelligence. There's so many sort of forces coming together. There is, as you say, there are cancer vaccines, mRNA vaccines, and other cancer vaccines being developed. There are new studies now to detect cancer in the bloodstream years before you have any symptoms. So the ability to begin to treat cancer before it even appears. There's a new radiation treatment in development. It's a flash of radiation that's literally a microsecond, and that's it. And so rather than a prolonged radiation treatment, which causes all sorts of damage to the surrounding tissue, it just hits the spot and just in an instant. And you're done. So as I was telling you before, immunotherapy is this incredibly promising area. So there's so much going on right now. It's a really exciting time for cancer research, but of course, it's also a terrifying time for cancer researchers.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of the politics and the motivation of the president's cuts on this. I mean, even, as you describe, if the NIH stopped taking meetings well before kind of DOGE came in, this seems like part of an sort of an orchestrated plan on what to do.
This was a very deliberate and premeditated campaign. And it's not an easy thing to do because the NIH and the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the NIH, which kind of oversees a lot of the cancer research in this country, they were built to be insulated from politics for obvious reasons. So if you wanted to make a sort of politically motivated assault on these institutions, it was going to require some forethought, and that's what happened. I mean, this administration came in and they knew exactly what to do and how they were going to do it, and they started freezing grants. I mean, it's unprecedented for active research grants to be canceled. I mean, truly unprecedented, and it was happening by the hundreds. It's unprecedented for universities to have their funding frozen. So this administration, they knew how to disrupt this system, and they did. And what's puzzling to me is you can explain this, I think, as, okay, this is part of the war on government bureaucracy, on what they would say is argue is government waste. This is part of the war on research universities that they feel are too progressive, too left. This is also important to say. This is part of a kind of attack on the scientific establishment, which of course has lost a lot of its credibility in many quarters during the COVID pandemic. I get that, but what's your plan? What are you going to, once you've canceled all these grants, once you've cut all this funding, what are you going to do? I mean, are we just going to concede the fact that we are going to, essentially surrender the war on cancer? I mean, or is there a plan that you just haven't told the American people about to build something in its place? And unfortunately, I haven't seen any evidence of a plan.
You have a statement from the Office of Management Budget. It says, efforts to focus NIH spending will establish a more sustainable and accountable fiscal path for NIH while ensuring that resources are managed effectively and in a manner that best supports America's biomedical research enterprise. You lay out kind of one of the critiques by Joe Lonsdale, a supporter of Elon Musk and the president. And he says, look, this is a system that's grown bloated and bureaucratic, and it's not working nearly as fast as it could. And, they want to change things. So what's the problem with that critique?
It is very important to recognize that this is not a perfect system by any means. There are criticisms of it both on the left and the right. Any bureaucratic system that has been evolving for more than 50 years now, it has gotten big, it has gotten unwieldy, it has gotten risk averse. There are too many older scientists who are blocking too many younger scientists who have kind of more potentially game changing ideas, who are more familiar with new technology, et cetera. that are not able to kind of enter the field. And scientists are spending too much of their time writing grant proposals because it's gotten so competitive. That's a problem. They should be in the lab. They shouldn't be spending all their hours, writing 120-page proposals for a grant. So that is all true, and Joe Lonsdale is correct about that. I think the problem is that this idea that you can just sort of disrupt this system, like you would disrupt the technology industry, and replace it with startup companies. That's not how scientific research works. It's one scientist in one lab making a small discovery and publishing it in a paper, and another scientist reading that paper and seeing, oh, that's interesting. I think I might be able to add a twist to that. I might be able to advance that idea a little further. It's collaborative. It's incremental. It's very different than how the Silicon Valley functions. So I would say that I think his criticisms of the system are legitimate. I think the idea that it could be replaced by some sort of disruption-centered Silicon Valley style approach seems misguided to me. To say nothing of the fact that, as I mentioned before, we haven't seen any proposal for what's coming next.
Are people today suffering from the cuts that are coming to cancer research?
So there are isolated examples of that happening. The chief of surgery at the National Cancer Institute, who's running a clinical trial now to treat a particular form of cancer with immunotherapy, a form of cancer that has not yet been successfully treated with immunotherapy. And two of his technicians who manufacture the cells he needs to inject in his patients to treat them, and these are late-stage cancer patients. These two technicians were laid off, so that delayed the treatment of his patients, delayed his clinical trials. So yes. The bigger issue, though, is the way this system is structured. The government funds the early stage research that no pharmaceutical company or biotechnology company is going to invest in, because it's experimental, it's sort of basic, it's foundational. When it's investigative, then you get patents, then you get biotechnology companies, then you get private investment. What we're seeing now will ultimately result in a slowing of that survival rate, because progress at this early stage is what leads to the great breakthroughs in treatments, the great successful clinical trials in humans. But if you take away that foundational research that only the government will pay for, no private industry doesn't want to pay for it, because it's too speculative. And we're seeing this system kind of being attacked at this very foundational level, and we won't really know the effects of it for years to come.
Staff writer at the New York Times Magazine, Jonathan Mahler, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Since launching to fame through popular American sitcoms Cheers and Frasier, award-winning actor Kelsey Grammer has built a celebrated career across TV, film, and Broadway. But behind the scenes, the star has suffered some great personal losses, including the rape and murder of his beloved younger sister, Karen. Grammer speaks to Michelle Martin about his memoir, laying bare his journey toward healing his pain and trauma. And just a note, this conversation contains some graphic details.
Thanks, Bianna. Kelsey Grammer, thank you so much for talking with us.
Pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful to meet you as yourself. So many people probably think they know you. You were on the air for so long as Dr. Frasier Crane, one of the longest running characters, if not the longest running character in television history. So many awards, so many accolades. So I was just wondering what that must have been like for you, for people, so many people to think they know you, but they couldn't possibly know you because they couldn't possibly have known what you were carrying with you.
Oh, Michelle, that's a good question. Thank you. I think, I understand, and there's a great value in it and a great reward in it that people find are so familiar with you on a at least on a presentational level. they think they recognize you because, of course, what they're seeing on television is some semblance of you, some reality. You're not very good at this stuff unless you've connected to a kind of a truthful characterization that people can recognize. So that they recognize, and that then breeds familiarity. That's not contempt, but it's actually just sort of gracious and generous toward you. But they don't know the specifics. They just have a good feeling. So they feel like you've been in their living room for so long, you're a friend.
Oh, that's good. I see your point. So it's a gift. It's more of a gift than a burden.
Absolutely.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
This book is it's called Karen. It's about your sister, and it's about the way she died, but it's also about who she was and who she was to you. So could we just start there? Like, who was she to you?
She was the most important part of my life. She was my greatest love. I mean, until, of course, I got older and, rededicated my affections to another human being outside of that relationship, my relationship with my sister. It was an extraordinary closeness we had. We had such a magnificent sort of childhood, adolescence together, young adulthood together. That was remarkable.
I guess what I took from the book was that you were able to kind of let her know how important she was to you. But she was taken from you in an awful, awful way. And I mean, it's just, your description of it is horrific. You went back and actually read the police report, and you even went back to the place where she was abducted from before she was kidnapped and raped and murdered. And I just, and you lived with this for a long time. And I was wondering what made this the right time to write this book and to explore all the complexity of that. Why now?
Yeah. There's a quotation in the book in several places. I refer to the Hamlet line about the readiness is all. I wasn't ready. For whatever reason, it didn't present itself to me as something I should or could do. And then the simple request to tell Karen's story turned into a book. I just jotted down some notes 3 years ago, maybe a little more than 3 years now, and realized about 8 pages in that I was going to be writing a book, and that it needed to be responsible and honest and uncover everything I could possibly think of. That's why the police report became important. That's also why it became important to go back and trace her steps, because I wasn't there when it happened. And the brother in me, the brother in me had to go because I couldn't before. And that's who I am. I needed to see her. I needed to see where she died. I needed to hold her in my creative imagination and to see her off in some way. And the book succeeded in doing that as well.
I can see that you lived with that guilt for a long time and not being able to protect her.
Yeah.
And I am sure that some listening to this conversation, be they men or women, but I can particularly understand as a brother why you would feel that way.
Older brother, older sister, you look at your siblings as your responsibility. You just do. If you're a human, it's like that sort of just comes along for the ride. So, yeah.
How do you think living with this loss influenced your trajectory as an artist?
Interesting. Yeah. It probably encouraged me to take risks, to not suffer fools a lot, even though I'm a very kind man. I mean, but eventually I'll roll my eyes and say, I got to get out of here. It's like, no, I've had enough of this. But most of the time I'm a very patient man, but with a focus on getting the job done. I like to get in the middle of things. I like to get into the fray. I like to fight it out. That probably is what I was given by virtue of losing Karen in a lot of ways. It was I'm not gonna waste this life.
I just want to say here that I'm really sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
It's just such a profound thing, and having just experienced that in one loss, but you've had many. I mean, your father was murdered. And then later, you lost other siblings in a diving accident. One of the things that I've noticed about loss is that it brings you into connection with other people who've had loss. But you can also see where a person might not want to feel those things anymore.
Yeah.
You might think, what would be great? I could be an accountant and do people's taxes.
Feeling for me is just one of those important things to do. It's just, it was kind of who I was before Karen died. So, I discovered this, but that was because of the loss of my grandfather. That was when Gordon died, the whole world ended as far as I was concerned. And then I had to rebuild one. And we kind of had to do that together. And so I found that emotional outlet and realized that was probably the path to my success and my freedom in a lot of ways, was to live in emotion. So could I have done without this one? Yeah. Because I also believe that, if you're a good actor, you dive into the creative sort of imagination of a situation, and that response is probably just as honest as if you really lived it, because you've got a great imagination, and just has equal authority to someone who's actually been through that. So you can loan your imagination to a character and be just as authentic as if you had actually lived it.
I'm just wondering what it meant to you because family is obviously so important to you, to play the same character for so many years over two different shows. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering, in a way, did that become kind of part of a family?
It did. That's a great question. I mean, I didn't exactly know my dad. So having an 11-year relationship with John Mahoney as my father was my relationship with my father. I mean, I didn't really have a relationship with my brothers. They were half brothers. My relationship with David Hyde Pierce was my brother relationship. And that was a wonderful thing to get vicariously through the experience of the work. That was a very good thing for me. And we dive into these experiences and basically live them, but by loaning ourselves to them.
But you were also in a lot of pain while you were having that other experience. I mean, you're very honest about it in the book, and I think you have been also elsewhere. You were dealing with some serious addiction during a period of that time. And just hearing you, reading you sort of describe like how you were able to kind of function even at the depths of that is like, I found myself wondering, like, how are you still here?
Well, it's interesting. It's a question that comes up with a lot of people. And it probably goes back to that thing we were talking about before. You just don't get to quit. I mean, because I feel like it would be kind of an insult to my sister, the life that was taken from her, to not live this life fully. That's all,
What do you think finally helped you to close that chapter?
Yeah. Some of it was just a surrender to the idea that, well, you know what? Stay in this and walk this path and see what happens. I wasn't actually determining that I was going to expect a certain result, but that it was worth the journey, and staying on it was more important than stepping off. And then I had I don't know what happened. I mean, it might have been my heart attack, honestly, where I just suddenly thought, because I wasn't practicing anything then. I wasn't abusing anything at the time. I may have been working out too hard that day, but that was the one that said, what do you want to do? You want to stay in this and feel this way, or do you want to get out and feel something else? And so I got out and felt something else, and I found love in a new family, and it would never make me. I would never want to hurt my children from previous relationships by saying, I found something that I didn't have there, but it just became different, and it became worth living for.
Oh, that's lovely. I do want to ask you it's my understanding from the book that one of the people who killed Karen is still alive and has been up for parole a number of times. Can you foresee that? This person?
I do. I often put myself in that. It gets released. I mean, the characterization of what there's a basic human impulse these days where I don't know, maybe it's political, maybe it's not, maybe it's just there is a thing like the accused, the criminal is favored. Okay, that could happen. That could happen. It's a devastating thing to think about. But I have to be able to come to terms with it if it's something that does happen, because I know that our society's gotten to a place where it might be that they actually feel sorry for him. And okay, I mean, I kind of get it.
But do you feel that the person who killed your sister has remorse?
He has said so. And that would make a big difference. But then he also, at the same time, in the last parole hearing, he actually said he didn't think he raped her. He didn't remember raping her. He didn't think he had done that.
Oh my!
And so it was blindingly suddenly useful to me that I had read the police report at that time. And one of the witnesses said his words, the last words Karen ever heard were, "Tilt your head back." And I thought, you know what? I got ammunition. That's ammunition. And I'd never heard that phrase before. It was part of one of the killer's statements who turned state's evidence. But it was such a shock to me to hear it myself, and then to realize that I used it myself to keep him in jail. So it was a power in a lot of ways.
In the book, you write to Freddie Glenn, who is one of the people who killed your sister. And you say, "We share a prison, Freddie, a prison you made. Our prison. It need not be Karen. She is free. You and I may share it forever, but now telling her story releases me." That is a very beautiful passage, but do you feel released?
Yeah. Yeah, it did. It made me realize that I no longer have to occupy the prison that I had built as a result of the one he had built. And in my imagination, his is one he can remain in, and mine I don't have to anymore. The walls have been knocked down. They've opened up. It's all in that place of freedom you find when the charge is taken off of something, but the grief will never actually disappear. But the horror of what happened to Karen is now eclipsed by how wonderful she was. And that's a lot of freedom.
Wow. Do you have someone in mind that you hope will find this book?
Yeah. Anyone who's suffered a similar kind of event, anyone who's lost, and any human being, we hear about them every day. Someone's lost their child. That's just, it's remarkable. And the pain, I can't imagine, but the idea was if there's anything I can do to help you, if there's anything, if this book can bring your grief, which is going to be constant for the rest of your life and hard and like a companion you really, really wish you didn't have. If I can give you anything that will square the grief to the joy that you got from knowing that person, at least square it up. Maybe it goes a little advantage toward the joy, but if you can get to square, then I did my job.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. To the degree that you can even envision that, what might be next? I mean, you've already lived so many lives. I mean, the fact is, this incredible TV character who will live with us forever. Right. As long as there are reruns and people like a whole new generation is discovering your work in that realm. And then now what might be next? What are you thinking about?
Well, I've got this new version of Frasier that's actually, it's kind of on the bubble, but there's a lot of people who are interested in seeing it continue to the point where it'd be the first time a character has actually been in 3 major shows for the duration of the show, the growth period for the character. Right now, the third one is it's kind of like a fledgling show. It just started. That show just started. There are some people who are interested in maybe seeing it go further. I'm certainly one of them. That'd be fascinating to me because the maturation of this character, matches my own, which has been kind of fascinating to finally become a great dad. That's sort of where Frasier's headed. So that's where I'm headed, hopefully. I mean, there's more writing to do now that I've discovered this. There was a whole bunch of stuff I didn't include in the book because it wasn't really connected to Karen. And I thought the things that were sort of contextual and maybe significant for my growth and her growth at the same time, that's what I wanted to put in the book. And then and the survival part of it, yeah. But this is Karen's homage, an homage to my sister, to her, to bring her back into membership with this community, with the world, and, this plane. And I think I've succeeded in that. And I know that the most important thing I got was one of my first friends read through the, first draft and said, "Wow, I think I know your sister."
Wow.
And that's what it was about.
Kelsey Grammer, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you very much.
Well, since President Trump returned to office more than 7 months ago, the U.S., as we know it, has been undergoing some dramatic shifts. As we mentioned earlier, prominent hedge fund billionaire Ray Dalio warned this week that the nation is sliding into a 1930s-style autocracy. So how did we get here? Former Clinton Secretary of Labor Robert Reich believes what we're seeing today is the result of a series of economic and political choices made in the last 50 years. He chronicles them in his recent memoir, Coming Up Short. It's a great title, I have to say. He joins Walter Isaacson to discuss what Democrats should do to respond to Trumpism.
Thank you, Bianna and Robert Reich. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Walter. It's good to see you.
Your book is Coming Up Short, a memoir of my America. I want to focus on that subtitle because one of the things that struck me when I read the book last night is that you take your own life story and make it into an allegory about America in that period. How'd you do that and why?
Well, first of all, Coming Up Short is indeed a double entendre because, as you know, I'm very short. But also America, I believe, came up short, in the sense that I was privileged to be a member of the post-war baby boom. I don't presume to know exactly how old you are, Walter. I think you're younger. I'm sure you're younger than I am. But that post-war baby boom generation, the year I was born, featured just within a few months of my birth, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. And the book focuses really on what we did, not necessarily those individuals entirely. I also include Clarence Thomas and many others of us who came to our adulthood in the 1960s, 1970s, and had an opportunity to take the legacy we were given by the so-called greatest generation and continue that legacy in terms of building a very strong American middle class and a stronger democracy. But we came up short in the sense that we ended up with Donald Trump as president. And I think that Donald Trump is not the source of our problems. What I say in the book is that Donald Trump is more the consequence or the culmination of a lot of failures over the last 40 or 50 years to deal with widening inequality and the problems faced by the American working class that ultimately chose him as president.
Well, let me talk about the baby boom generation. Talk about somebody born the year you were born, late 1940s, had about an 80% chance of being financially better off than their parents. If you're born in the 80s or 90s, you have less than a 50% chance of being better off financially. That seems huge to me. What happened? Why?
In the late 70s, there was kind of a giant U-turn, and I get into this in the book. We, instead of continuing to grow the middle class, we actually decided, and I say we figuratively, it was not everybody in America, it was actually an increasingly politically potent corporate culture, big corporations and wealthy individuals whose money began to dominate American politics in a way that did rig the market. Now, I don't want to be too dramatic about it or sort of parrot exactly what Bernie Sanders and others have said, but there's a lot of truth to it. The market did change. And that meant that if you were a non-college graduate, and if you were brought up in the Middle West or in the South, and you didn't have the opportunities you had. You were no longer a member of a union. Unions were about, and they constituted something in the order of 35% of all the private sector workers in the 1960s or 70s, and then declined to today, now 6% of private sector workers. In many, many respects, monopolization, for example, big companies became much, much stronger, monopolized their markets in ways that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they did not. The combination of all of the ways in which the market was rigged made it very difficult to fulfill what you're referring to, and that is the social contract that we had coming out of the Second World War.
One of the themes in your book is bullying, and you were bullied as a kid. And in some ways, you say that's what's happened to the average American. Explain that.
Well, I became quite sensitive to the issue of bullying because I am short, and I was, like many children are, bullied in school. But one of my protectors, one of the older boys I kind of leaned on or relied on to protect me from the bullies, himself was bullied in a much more profound way when he was registering voters in 1964. His name was Michael Schwerner. He and two other civil rights workers were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. And then, in many ways, Walter, changed my life and my view of bullying. I began to see that bullying was about power. It is about power. It's about people with power abusing that power and treating others without power in ways that exploit them. And I'm talking about employers and employees, or men bullying women, or white supremacists bullying black people. I mean, you see bullying all over. And as inequality has widened in America over certainly the last 40 years, the opportunities for the bullies, those at the top who have a great deal of resource, to take out their bullying on people who are weaker than they are, have increased. Donald Trump is the bully of bullies. I think that he was elected in part because a lot of people who felt so bullied by the system saw him as somebody who could bully everybody else. Of course, he is not a representative of the working class. He actually has provided huge tax cuts to the wealthy and deregulated Wall Street and deregulated the environment and made, I think, over time, the working class much more vulnerable. Nevertheless, that was his selling.
Wait. Then why did he get a plurality of the votes?
I think he got a plurality of votes in 2024, you're referring to, because the Democrats did not come up with a response to the bullying. You see, and I get at this in the book, and this is something that I've been harping on, Walter, for years, and that is that the Democrats need to explain to the working class, to the vast middle class that has felt bullied, why the market is rigged against them. Democrats need to point out that the large corporations and the wealthy people who are putting huge amounts of money into American politics are doing this in ways that hurt much of the middle class and certainly the working class. And as a result, the Democrats have not provided, as has Donald Trump and some Republicans before him an explanation. Now, the Trump explanation, remember, has been about cultural bullies. The Trump explanation has been, well, it's the deep, the deep state, or it's immigrants, or it's people who are different, such as transgender youth. The cultural culprits here are not responsible for why most Americans feel bullied. But if the Democrats don't point out the real bullies, then there's no opportunity for anybody to know what's going on. And as a result, Donald Trump or demagogues like him are elected, or will be, and will continue to be elected as far as the eye can see. Democrats have got to name and be clear about who the national bullies really are, why there is brutality in the system, why there is abuse of power in the system.
When did Democrats lose touch with the working class?
Well, in the book, I trace it back to the 1990s. I am very, very proud to have been a member of the Clinton administration. I think we accomplished a great deal. But I think that Bill Clinton and a lot of the Democrats associated with the Democratic Leadership Council, do you remember them? The so-called moderate Democrats, the new Democrats, they refused to and were unwilling to really make the kind of alliance with organized labor, with the grassroots groups, name the kind of brutality and the bullies that were really beginning to have a great deal of power in America because of all the money in American politics. And I think that and in adopting free trade, and in deregulating Wall Street, and in taking their eyes off monopolies, and allowing the companies to basically bash unions and get rid of unions. All of this helped pave the way for Donald Trump.
In the book, actually, you trace it even further back to some extent, even to the Port Huron statement and the progressive left of the 60s and 70s. Explain how you think that may have led the Democratic Party astray of getting too much into this progressive left ideology.
Well, I don't really take on, as you put it, progressive left ideology in the sense that I think the core problem, the Port Huron statement, I viewed as a very important, I still do view as a very important statement with regard to the kind of populist leanings of our generation, my generation. But I think that it left out the working class. And many of the reform movements of the 60s, 70s, and 80s left out the working class. The women's movement was very important, obviously. Even the civil rights movement, the voting rights movement. I was part of that. The anti-Vietnam War movement, the movement to provide equal marriage rights. All of them terribly important. But what was left out was the working class and the labor movement, and the core responsibility of the Democratic Party as a legacy of Franklin D. Roosevelt to represent the people who did not have power, represent people who were really left out of power. But it's not too late. I think that Donald Trump and the Trump administration gives the Democrats and progressives an opportunity to do what they did not do in the 80s and 90s and even at the turn of this century, and that is reclaim the ground that was lost, because the Trump administration is really something that is so different from what the conservative Republicans had represented and tried to achieve. It is, in a sense, a an administration that is more closely aligned. And I'm going to use a word here that I rarely use, and I apologize in advance. But the Trump administration is closely aligned with fascist movements in history and right-wing movements in Europe, neo-Nazi movements around the world, particularly in Europe. And this gives the Democrats enormous ground, enormous opportunity to refashion a coalition and create a new multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multi-class coalition that is not just based on democracy. Yes, that's important. That's critically important. But it's also based on widening prosperity for everyone.
You use the incredibly loaded word fascism. And in your book, you have Henry Wallace, the Democrat, very progressive Democrat, writing an essay about fascism. I think it's in the 1940s.
1944. Well, it was interesting. Henry Wallace, a vice president at the time to Franklin D. Roosevelt, wrote in the New York Times Magazine a very important article, lost mostly to history. I tried to revive it, in which he warns of American fascism. And this is at a time we're fighting the Second World War, but Wallace sees. He writes this article with the permission of Franklin D. Roosevelt. He writes about the underpinnings of monopolization of the very crude efforts to destroy American unions, to labor unions, the efforts of white supremacists to reassert themselves through this kind of quiet fascism that he sees. It's an undercurrent in America that Henry Wallace identifies, and that undoubtedly has been there before and has been there since, at least since the 1930s, and is now expressing itself in ways that I think Wallace had very presciently seen possible.
You talk about the populism of the right and moving towards authoritarianism. Is there a possibility of an economic populism of the left? And who do you think would, how would that be expressed within the Democratic Party in the U.S.?
Well, there is a populism of the left. I mean, Bernie Sanders was the best exponent and an expression of that. But he was saying something that resonated with many Americans. And that is that we've got to take our country back economically from big corporations, from wealthy people that are abusing their wealth and their power. I mean, he was hearkening back to something that Louis Brandeis, the great jurist, was reputed to have said in the 1920s, which is that America has a choice. We can either have great wealth in the hands of a few people, or we can have a democracy, but we can't have both. And Bernie Sanders came very, very close to getting the Democratic nomination. Now, history will not know whether he could have beaten Donald Trump, who is also improbable. I remember, Walter, I was doing a book in 2015, some research for a book. I went around many places in the Midwest of the South, doing kind of a focus groups, really free-floating focus groups. And I remember asking people all over the country, particularly in the Rust Belt in the South, if you had to vote today, who would you vote for your next president? Now, this is 2015, when Hillary Clinton was the putative nominee for the Democrats, and Jeb Bush was the putative nominee for the Republicans. And I kept on hearing again and again people saying, well, we want either Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, how can you put Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders in the same sentence? But the fact was that even in 2015, people who felt bullied, and I'm going to use that metaphor because that it really does describe the people that I met and so many people across the country, and still does. They wanted somebody who would stop the bullying.
Robert Reich, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
In the United States, as some immigrant families fear the Trump administration's ICE crackdown, they are taking the painful decision to leave the United States, even if it means separating from their families. One such case is that of Se-Jun Park, a U.S. Army veteran recently forced to self-deport back to South Korea over decades-old drug charges that were linked to PTSD that he suffered. The Purple Heart recipient and his attorney, Danny Cole Ramos, joined Michelle Martin to share his story of leaving behind the only country he's ever called home.
Thanks, Christian. Se-Jun Park, Danny Cole Ramos, thank you both so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mr. Park, I'm going to start with you. You came to the United States by yourself when you were so young. So as briefly as you can, would you just tell us what brought you to the United States at such a young age and alone?
My mom came to the United States when I was 6, and I was living with my father at the time. So he read me a letter from my mom and asked me if I want to go live with my mom. So at that time, as a young child, I made that choice to go live with my mom. So he set up everything. They put a little tag on me, and then I got on a plane by myself and got escorted from Korea to Hawaii, Hawaii to LA, LA to Dallas, and Dallas to Miami. That's where I reunited with my mom at 7 years old. Yes.
At one point, you enlisted in the Army. You went into combat in Panama during the U.S. military action in Panama. You were only 19 years old. I understand that you were shot. You were actually shot in the spine.
Yes. Well, I turned 20 in basic training. So when I joined at 19, and then during the war, I was 20 years old, barely 20. It was a second day patrolling around. I got shot twice in the back. One was in the spine and the other one left lower back, and it went in my body, tumbling around, dodging all my vital organs, the lung, the liver, the heart. If I take an x-ray, I light up like a Christmas tree. I still have little shrapnels left inside my body. And I was very fortunate and lucky.
Well, I'm very glad that you're here with us to tell us the story. But you received the Purple Heart, which is acknowledging that you were wounded in action, and you were honorably discharged. You were honorably discharged. It's my understanding, though, that you struggled after you left the service. Why do you think that is? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
At the time, there was no such thing as PTSD, but I didn't know what it was. I had nightmares almost every night. I couldn't sleep. I had nightmares. I'd get cold sweats out of nowhere. I couldn't watch war movies. I couldn't hear loud sounds. Like at the time in LA, there was a lot of gunfire going on every night. You could hear the gunshots. So every time I would hear a gunshot, I would get nervous and start acting out. I couldn't tell anybody what I was going through because, once again, there was no such thing as PTSD. And like being a male, I was supposed to be a tough guy. So I didn't want to go crying to anyone of what I was feeling. So I really had to deal with everything on my own.
Well, just forgive me with respect, there was such a thing as PTSD that apparently there just was no language for it then. Do you think that you started self-medicating as a consequence of that?
Well, I definitely feel that way because marijuana helped. Marijuana helped me go to sleep without dreaming because I had nightmares all the time. And I found a way, if I smoked weed, that I wouldn't get nightmares and I would actually get to sleep at night. So that's what kind of started off. Eventually, it led to harder drugs. So eventually, I started doing crack cocaine, and which pretty much took control of my life at such a young age. And that's where the final, when I did get arrested, it was possession of crack cocaine. Yes.
And also, as my understanding, bail jumping or not meeting a required court appearance. Is that accurate?
Yes. Well, the judge gave me a few chances. So she told me one time, like, Mr. Park, next time you come into my courtroom with the dirty urine, you will be sent to prison. Oh. So me being scared and nervous, that happened in New York. So I got in my car, and from New York, I drove to LA, and then from LA, got on a plane and went to Hawaii.
Oh, my. Okay.
A year and a half later, the U.S. Marshals came looking for me, and then I turned myself in once I found out they were looking for me.
You did serve time in prison. You then did have many, many years of sobriety. You raised a family. It's my understanding that how else can I put it? You have fulfilled your obligations to the country. Would that be fair to say?
Yes. I lived with that addiction for many years. So when I went to prison, when people say when you hit rock bottom, it's easy to quit. Literally, when I went to prison, that was my rock bottom. I started praying every night, losing my kids, losing my family, not knowing how long I'm going to be gone for. So that really helped me kick the drug habit cold turkey. It was not hard after that. And then when I did get released, I wanted to catch up my time with my children and live a good life, and which I have been doing, checking with ICE or immigration officers every year. At first, it was once a month, and then once every 3 months, and then once every 6 months. And eventually, since I was doing good, they put it to once every year. And that's how I've been living for the past 14 years, over 14 years.
So here's where I want to turn to your attorney, Danny Cole Ramos. It's my understanding that that Mr. Park did have a removal order. Would that be as a consequence of this drug conviction? Would that have been that?
Yeah, so for Mr. Park's situation, he had a removal order based on 2 convictions that happened in New York that he mentioned. So one was the possession of the controlled substance, and then the other was jumping bail when he missed that that drug testing date mandated by his judge. So those 2 convictions alone were what Immigration and Customs Enforcement used to insert a removal order on him. Now, the thing that was the most serious out of the 2 convictions were his bail jumping. And in immigration law, bail jumping is considered an aggravated felony. And for aggravated felonies in immigration law, they're very serious crimes. They're considered convictions that have no potential relief from deportation, and it can possibly permanently bar you from naturalizing as a U.S. citizen. We can think of them as like murder. We can think of them as rape. We can think of them as robbery or trafficking drugs or human trafficking. It seems surreal that jumping bail is considered an aggravated felony, almost the equivalent of murder, rape, robbery, dealing drugs. And so because of that bail jumping conviction that he had in New York, that was the reason that he was barred from any relief or cancellation from removal. And that's why that removal order was reinstated in 2010.
Mr. Park had a removal order, but he's lived in this country for all this time. So he had a removal order for 14 years and then nothing happened. So then what happened?
Yeah, so when he first got his removal order, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, has discretion to enforce which removal orders they want to do. And so what then they decided to work on was, hey, Mr. Park, you do have a removal order, you did do these convictions, but we're going to put you on something called deferred action. And deferred action is what ICE uses as their discretion to say, hey, you do have a deportation order, we can remove you, but considering Mr. Park's background as a Purple Heart veteran, they decided that he wouldn't be considered a priority for deportation. They would just let him live his life, but with certain restrictions, as he mentioned, right? So with it, checking in with ICE on a regular basis, making sure that he stays clean and sober. And then he does have work authorization. So he's still allowed to work. He had to pay about thousands of dollars a year to renew that work permit, but he was able to live his life so long as he had no criminal record and stayed clean and sober.
So then what happened? I mean, so last month, what happened last month?
Yeah, so for Mr. Park, he was warned at his last check-in back in May of 2024 that if President Trump returns to office, there's a strong chance that he would get his deferred action taken away and that the removal order back in 2010 would be enforced. We go back in June last month to check in with the ICE officer. And the ICE officer said, and I remember vividly what he told me and staging was like, because of this new administration, because of this new regime, that we're going to have to take away your deferred action. And the ICE officer did say to him that, I could detain you right now. But what we worked out with the ICE officer is like, hey, that doesn't look good that you're going to detain him right now because his whole family is here waiting for him at his ICE check-in. So what we agreed to do is that Mr. Park would self-deport, put on an ankle monitor until then, and have an itinerary to leave the United States by the end of the month.
Mr. Park, can I just ask what went through your mind when you heard this?
That night when I went home, I think it was my PTSD acting more. I had a hard time sleeping that night because knowing that I could have been detained and I could have been in a jail cell instead of me being at home, it did a lot to me, and it was surreal. I had 3 weeks to remove myself. My children, my parents, they're old. And my aunt and uncle, they're all old, and I've been kind of taking care of them. So processing everything was really tough. I just couldn't believe that it was actually happening. I haven't been to Korea in over 30 years, like 30 years literally. So it's like going back to a country that I have no idea about. So it was really tough, and a lot was going through my mind all the way through to the day I got on that plane.
You almost made the ultimate sacrifice. I mean, you took two bullets, a bullet in the spine for the United States. And so I'm just curious, if you don't mind my asking, why you never applied for citizenship.
I've been asked that a lot. You have to understand, like, I came when I was 7 years old, legal resident with the green card through my mother and everything. I always thought I was almost equivalent as a citizen. I never joined the military to get a citizen. It wasn't like that. I always felt like I am an American because I came here so long early, and with the legal green card, I thought I can just live in the United States like a normal citizen person. And then I had other priorities. I was still young and just never thought getting a citizenship was on the top of my priority because I thought I was an American. I served for the country, and I just thought it was normal and legal for me to just live in the United States with a green card. I really felt that way. Obviously, I was wrong.
There are those who would argue that a person who breaks the law, especially a felony, achieving citizenship through naturalization is a privilege, not a right, and that you forfeit that right by breaking the law. For someone who felt that 100%. Way, what would you say?
No, I made mistakes. I had a drug addiction. It wasn't like a violent crime. I wasn't hurting other people. I was hurting myself. Now I realized it was mostly due to my PTSD and other problems I had. But I never denied that fact that, yes, I did break the law. I wasn't in a right, clear mental state. Even with my kids and everything, it was tough. It was tough living that life as an addicted person, trying to make it through every day with the struggle of being a drug addict. So I totally understand when people say that about me because that's who I was at the time, struggling with drugs.
So we did reach out to ICE about why your deferred action was revoked after more than a decade of compliance, as Mr. Ramos just laid out. And this is what the agency said in a statement. They said Se-Jun Park's extensive criminal history includes convictions for possessing, manufacturing, or selling a dangerous weapon, carrying a loaded firearm in a public place, assault, and criminal possession of a controlled substance. In 2010, an immigration judge issued him an order of removal. Park's appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals that same month was dismissed by the board in April 2011. With no legal basis to remain in the U.S. and a final order of removal, Park was allowed to self-deport to Korea. President Trump and Secretary Noem have been clear. Criminal illegal aliens are not welcome in the U.S. If you come to our country and break our laws, we will find you, arrest you, and deport you. That's a promise. So that's what they have to say about that. So can I hear from each of you about how you respond to that?
I don't know where they came up with the manufacturing weapon because I've never done that. I've never manufactured no dangerous weapon like that. Yes, I have been arrested with the possession of a gun. The reason we moved to Hawaii from LA was we're the victims of, our family is the LA riots. Our store burnt down during the LA riots, got looted. And at that time, early 90s, just from going to work in South Central LA, I would always carry a gun. I didn't have a permit for it or anything like that, but it was for safety. And one day I got pulled over and I had a concealed weapon on me. That's where that gun charge came from. And then the firing was, I was celebrating me joining the army on top of with a couple of friends, shooting up in the air. The firing arm, possession of a gun, those two are real, but I never manufactured no guns or solicit drugs. I don't know where they got that from because that wasn't what I did. That was not part of that.
Mr. Ramos, what do you have to say about that? You heard the ICE statement. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say Mr. Park was never what they quoted as a criminal illegal alien. He came here legally as a green card holder. So I just want to get that record straight. And then the second part I want to respond to with that comment with DHS is how does deporting someone like Mr. Park, a Purple Heart veteran who served this country, took 2 bullets for this country, and despite his past mistakes, was able to turn his life around, redeem himself, raise 2 kids, have a job, and then while at the same time take care of his elderly mother who's facing early onset stages of dementia. Mm-hmm. How does deporting him make this country safer? When I think about Mr. Park's situation, right, there's a lot of veterans like him who have gone through what he's gone through, suffered PTSD from a deployment. They also went through some drug addiction, and like Mr. Park, they overcome it, and they get support to overcome it. Mm-hmm. The difference between them and Mr. Park is that Mr. Park has this immigration status of his that affects his ability to stay in the United States, and punishes him for past mistakes, even though he showed that he's redeemed himself. And I think in every aspect of Mr. Park, besides paper, he is an American. Every sense of him, every part of his story is American. I think there's so many parts of it that I think people across the country can resonate with.
So, Mr. Park, what was it like to go back to Korea after not having lived there for so many years? Do you even speak Korean anymore?
Luckily I do, because my mom, I take care of her. She speaks fluently Korean. So at home, luckily I did keep that part. I can't read or write, and I guess it's broken Korean. It's not like I speak it perfectly, but enough to get by. It's overwhelming. The first 3-4 days, I couldn't stop crying for hours every morning, just everything sinking in. And I think my PTSD was acting up a little more. Feel ashamed, like to being like kicked out of the country, coming back to a country I haven't been. So it has been really tough. It's tomorrow will be exactly 1 month since I've been here. It's been a long month. So I'm doing my best. I'm still hopeful maybe one day I can make it back to my family, my real family in Hawaii.
So, Mr. Ramos, before we let you go, does Mr. Park have any recourse?
Yes, he does. We're looking at all these legal options, and I've expressed this to Mr. Park before. It's going to be a long process and a long shot. So the main thing that we're working on right now is we sent in a request a month ago to the Queens District Attorney's Office to replete those 2 convictions that caused his deportation order in the first place. So it's the possession of the controlled substance and then the jumping bail. There's been new law in 2023 from the Second Circuit that makes his possession of a controlled substance no longer a removable offense. Mm. However, he still has this bail jumping conviction, which is the aggravated felony that barred him from any kind of relief or cancellation of removal. So what we sent in a request to the district attorney's office in Queens is that asking if they would be willing to negotiate with us to at least take that bail jumping from a felony and drop it down from a misdemeanor. If it's dropped down to a misdemeanor, at least a misdemeanor, it allows us some opportunity to reopen his removal order in immigration court, request the court to then vacate it, and then if all those convictions are vacated and the removal order is vacated, then there's possibly a pathway for him to come back to the United States.
Seijun Park, Danico Ramos, thank you both so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Texas Republicans are breaking tradition as they plan to redraw congressional maps ahead of next year's midterms. It's a move that many weren't expecting until the end of the decade, but comes at the behest of President Trump, who's hoping to keep the narrow GOP House majority intact. Democrats are trying to push back, with some calling this unusual redistricting drive completely unethical and deplorable. David Daley is a senior fellow at the organization Fair Vote, and he joins Hari Srinivasan to discuss the impact of this decision.
Bianna, thanks. David Daley, thanks so much for joining us. Last week in Texas, there was an extension of the legislative session, and redistricting is back on that. And I think that probably caught a few people by surprise because we're kind of used to redistricting being once a 10-year event.
That's what redistricting is in most states. That's not the case in Texas. There are a handful of states where you can do a mid-decade redistricting. Those usually tend to be doubly political, right? I mean, gerrymandering that takes place after the census in state legislatures oftentimes locks in political maps for a decade. But when you do this in the middle of a decade, you've got the benefit of the previous couple elections. You can tell which seats are competitive, and it gives you a real advantage if you jump back in and take another crack at those maps. That's what's happening in Texas right now. It could have real consequences for the midterm elections in 2026.
So just so I don't lose my kind of overseas audience or people who aren't that familiar with redistricting versus gerrymandering, I mean, first of all, what is the purpose of redrawing map lines per state and creating new House districts?
It has a wonderful idea behind it. Every 10 years after the census, we want to redraw every congressional and state legislative district in the country in order to account for population changes and population shifts over the previous decade. So essentially, it has fairness really at its core. The trouble is the politicians who draw these lines, especially these days with the kinds of technology and voter data and sophisticated mapping systems that they have, can use this process not to create an actual fair map or a competitive map, but to lock in a partisan advantage for their side. Those advantages have only become bigger and bigger as the technology has improved, and that's gerrymandering. That is the use of redistricting in order to lock in political benefits.
So when we look at the relationship between drawing a map in Texas and national politics, are you saying this is because if I can make sure that I have a district that is more likely to go Republican or more likely to go Democrat, and I can essentially secure more seats in the U.S. House? And right now, we have a very small imbalance where the Republicans have an advantage by just a couple of votes. So if they were able to create entirely new districts, they would just pad that lead.
That's right. Right now, Republicans have a 3-seat advantage in the U.S. House. So Democrats only have to flip a handful of seats in the 2026 midterms in order to take back the chamber. Ordinarily, the party that is out of the White House does pretty well during midterms. If you look at the 2018 midterms, really good for Democrats. The 2010 midterms, really good for Republicans. But if you can go into Texas and do a mid-decade redraw and take someplace between 2 and 5 Democratic seats off the board, suddenly then you've moved the Republican advantage from 3 seats to somewhere closer to 6 or 7. There is also likely to be a new map coming out of Ohio that could flip 2 close Democratic seats there. And there is a really important Voting Rights Act and redistricting case that the U.S. Supreme Court will hear about majority-minority seats beginning in the fall that could lead to the disappearance of majority-minority Black Democratic seats in Alabama, Louisiana, perhaps elsewhere across the South. So when we say right now that Democrats need to flip 3 seats, that's on the current map. That could really change. Democrats could be looking at having to pick up somewhere closer to a dozen seats to win the House. And that gets much, much harder because there's just not a lot of competitive seats out there, due in part to all of the gerrymandering.
The Department of Justice sent Governor Abbott a letter earlier this month, and they were expressing serious concerns regarding the legality of 4 of Texas's congressional districts. They basically said that these are unconstitutional racial gerrymanders.
I would say first that the DOJ letter is really designed to give Governor Abbott cover here. I would not call those districts racial gerrymanders. I would call those majority minority seats that are drawn in order to keep Texas in line with the Voting Rights Act.
In a statement, the Texas Republican Party said this latest round of redistricting is an essential step to preserving GOP control in Congress and advancing President Trump's America First agenda. I mean, in a way, it's a very honest declaration of their intentions, but it's also very partisan. is it legal?
It's very partisan and it's very legal. First, it's very legal because Texas allows this kind of mid-decade redistricting. But second, that entire statement is on the table right now because of John Roberts in the U.S. Supreme Court. In a decision in 2019, in a case from North Carolina called Common Cause versus Rucho, the court said that partisan gerrymandering is a non-justiciable political issue. They closed the federal courts to these claims, and they did so at exactly the moment in which lower federal courts, judges appointed by presidents of both parties, made it very clear that they had all the tools they needed to determine when a partisan gerrymander had gone too far. They threw out Democratic gerrymanders in Maryland. They threw out Republican gerrymanders in Ohio and Michigan and North Carolina and Wisconsin. And they had a range of evidence, and they said, we know how to do this. And John Roberts and the court said no. They said that all these standards, all these measures were sociological gobbledygook. They said it was going to look like the courts were being political. Instead, it was the U.S. Supreme Court that was being political. They locked in these gains for Republicans. They incentivized both parties in 2021 to maximize their gerrymanders, knowing that nobody would stop them. And they encouraged statements like the one we see from the Texas GOP. Because when politicians now say that we were doing an intentional partisan gerrymander, that is exactly in line with the decision that Roberts handed down. He made this possible. The court enabled this attack on democracy that both parties are engaged in right now.
If the Democrats felt like that court case was a loss for them, I mean, they were controlling Congress from 21 to 23. Why didn't they pass, legislation against gerrymandering? I mean, you could conceivably see that that could be a bipartisan source of agreement because both teams realize that this is just, kind of this technological warfare that keeps escalating.
Yeah, I wish they had. Certainly what you saw at that point in time was a real public push on this. You had Michigan and Colorado and Utah and Missouri, Virginia, voters in all of those states voting to try to rein in the worst excesses of this system. And, red states, blue states, purple states, voters hate gerrymandering every place. And Democrats attempted to include this in some of the voting rights packages that they were advancing back in 2021. They did not make it through the Senate, I believe, largely because of the filibuster. You just didn't have everybody on board for that kind of change. This is a national problem. It needs a national solution. It can't be fixed piecemeal state by state. And when the courts pulled themselves out of this, it really took away the last best possibility of a neutral arbiter coming in and trying to enforce a standard. It's really difficult for politicians to end gerrymandering. They benefit from it. They like it. If we're going to fix it, it needs a national problem, and it needs to take on the real, fundamental question here, which is that in a nation that has 435 single-member districts, how you draw the lines in all of those districts determines winners and losers. There's a bill that Congress is considering right now, the Fair Representation Act, proposed by Don Beyer and Jamie Raskin, that would move us towards a more proportional system that would make every district a swing district. It would put an end to gerrymandering. Oh, and by the way, it also calls for an end to mid-decade redistricting every place. I think that's the kind of big picture thinking that this requires.
So what would be the impact if, say, Governor Newsom in California or Governor Murphy in New Jersey tried to counter whatever happens in Texas?
It would be additionally bad for voters in all of those states. I think the road in California is very difficult. California has a nonpartisan independent commission draw its lines. If California wants to do something about this, they would either have to have a special election to change their constitutional system, or the legislature would have to find some kind of fig leaf to suggest that they could do a mid-decade redistricting on their own above and beyond the commission. That would certainly wind up in court, and I can't imagine that the legislature would win. New Jersey could do the same thing. They have a commission. The state legislature could try to step in, but I think that Democrats have really maximized their gains on a lot of these maps. It's currently a 9-3 Democratic delegation in New Jersey. It's a 14-3 Democratic delegation in Illinois. It's a 7-1 in Maryland. There's not a lot of blue states where Democrats can do what Republicans are trying to do in Texas. So it's going to be very difficult for them to find a way to match this.
Okay, so there have been some critics of what the Republicans are trying in Texas, saying, look, this could backfire and create what's, I think the phrase is a dummy-mander. What does that mean?
A dummy-mander is a great term, right? A dummy-mander means a map that is drawn to benefit one side, but that the political situation changes and it ends up backfiring. You spread your voters too thin, you get too greedy trying for too many seats. I think this is unlikely to happen in Texas, and I think the fact that we're talking about it in many ways is a sign that Democrats don't have a lot of good options here other than to try to tell Republicans, well, be careful, this might not work, it might backfire on you. Texas has a 25-13 Republican delegation. Only one of those 25 Republican seats is remotely competitive. That one seat that was won at 57% of the vote in 2024. Of the other 24 seats, all of them were won with more than 60% of the vote. 13 of those seats were won with more than 65% of the vote, or were completely uncontested at all. If Republicans want to do this, the two South Texas districts, the 34th and 28th, which are currently Democratic districts, very close, within 5%, you could wipe those away pretty quickly. And then if you wanted to go for a third, a fourth seat, what you would do is you'd go up towards like Dallas-Fort Worth. You would take a little piece of the city and then you would attach it to a big swath of central eastern Texas, those red districts right now that are almost entirely uncontested by Democrats, big Republican counties. So I think you could probably get to 4 seats without even putting a dummy-mander on the table. Republicans have not drawn a dummy-mander in the modern technological era. They are very, very good at this. The consultant that they brought on in 2021 to work on their maps is the same consultant who drew the maps in Wisconsin, a map that has withstood Democratic waves and never come close to backfiring. I think when we talk about a dummy-mander, we're talking about something that might have been more apt to happen in the 1990s or the 2000s, not really going to happen right now.
You know, there are people who will say, listen, the maps have been gerrymandered every 10 years. But in 2018, we had midterms where the Democrats kind of overcame some of those.
Yeah, you're right. Democrats took back the House in 2018. But I think what's important to recognize about that is that Democrats were able to win that back, not because they defeated gerrymandering or because these maps backfired, but it's because Democrats and citizens defeated these maps in the courts ahead of time. So you had court cases that created fair maps and got rid of the gerrymandered maps in Pennsylvania, in parts of Florida, in Virginia, in North Carolina. So the map in 2018 looked very different from the map elsewhere. Democrats also won that year because they were able to win about 75% of the seats that they flipped were drawn by courts or drawn by commissions. So they maximized their gains in the fair, competitive districts where it was still possible to do that. They did not really make any gains at all on gerrymandered maps. They were able to win back 2 seats in Texas and 2 seats in Michigan that way, 4 of them. And that is all that these maps surrendered over a decade in all of these states in all of these elections. Those districts don't exist anymore. Republicans in 2021 went into Indiana, they went into Oklahoma, they went into Kansas, they went into Utah. These seats that went to Democrats in 2018 in that wave, they were redrawn. They're not going to go back the other way. So there's a really, really small pool of seats for Democrats to go after. You had 37 of 435 races in 2024 that were within 5%. Democrats already won 22 of those that year. It leaves you with 15 competitive districts. There were only 3 districts in which a Republican was elected, but Kamala Harris carried the district. That's Don Bacon's seat in Nebraska, Michael Lawler in New York, Brian Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania. So you could give it a shot, but the number of targets and how many voters you'd have to persuade in these districts, very, very difficult at this point.
Senior fellow of Fair Vote and author of Anti-Democratic, David Daley, thanks so much.
A pleasure. Thank you.